Hi everyone. This video is about bonus block number 1 for our 2021 Jelly Roll Block of the Month challenge. If you're not already participating, you can check the description under this video. You'll find a link to my Facebook group where you'll find everything you need. So we're going to start by taking a look at the cuts you're going to need. I wanted to mention that when I cut the darker fabric, we have two contrasting colors. When I cut the darker strips, I first looked at what I had left over from previous blocks because the darker strips take just slightly over 42 inches, which is your normal strip length. So I did have some of this fabric in my leftover from another block, so I chose this strip so that I would have enough to make all the cuts in the same fabric. So the first thing you're going to cut is 4 pieces that are 2.5, the width of your strip, by 3. So you want 4 pieces, 2.5 by 3. And then you're going to cut 6 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5. So you have 6 of those. And that's from the dark fabric. The cuts are different, so you don't want to mix up the dark and the white. You want to cut the right pieces from the right color. From the white, or your light strip, you're going to cut 6 pieces, again 2.5 by 4.5. And you're going to cut 2 that are 2.5 by 7.5. I don't have a white jelly roll or strip set, so I cut these from fabric by hand. There we go. We'll set this aside and we'll start laying out our block. So on your top row, 2.5 by 4.5, 2.5 by 4.5. These are dark. In the center, a 2.5 by 4.5 light. For your second row, a 7.5 with 2 3-inch. For your middle row, 2 4.5 light or white and a 4.5 dark. And now you're going to do the same thing, but in reverse. So starting with this row, I'm going to put a 4.5 dark. And 2 4.5 light. Then I'm going to put the 7.5 light with 2 3-inch dark. Oops, I'm going to be off camera. I better move this up a little so you don't lose sight of what I'm doing. Sorry about that. Let's just move these up. There we go. And then your last row, the 4.5 light and the 2 4.5 dark. It's 6 rows, so it looks really long before it's sewn together. If you don't have any left over of the dark strip to get all the cuts you want, another thing you can do, if you remember the February block, the log cabin block, in the center we used a different color. So let's say you don't have enough dark strip. You can use this as an opportunity to tie in that center piece again that you used in February so that you use it again in your quilt. I used red on my February block, but I'm going to use the strips in here. If you're cutting from yardage, and you're using the design space file that I'm going to share, you'll see these 3 blocks are not 2.5. They're 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. So you have squares in the center, and then of course you can replace the center with any color you prefer. Okay, so now that we've got all this laid out, we're going to start by sewing 1 row at a time. The March block we did had so much nesting. Just about every seam had to be nested. But on this block, our seams do not line up anywhere. Just here. Not there, not there, not there, not there. You have only these seams that line up. So this is the only nesting you're going to have. And if you've done the March block, you're already a pro at nesting your seams. So I'm going to start by sewing this row, and I'll continue through until I've sewn all 6 rows. I also wanted to mention you want to be sure to press all your seams. Super important to keep your block in shape and flat. You want to press well every time you sew a seam. I'm going to press my seams towards the dark fabric, except in the middle I'm going to press towards the dark and this one towards the light, because when we assemble the rows, as I mentioned, these are the only 2 points that we need to nest. So you will want your seams going in opposite direction. So to the center, to the outside. So let's start sewing. So you can see the pattern coming together. And as I mentioned, on this one, I press my seams towards the dark. So when I repeat this row, I'm going to press my seams towards the white. And my final row. Again, I've pressed towards the darker fabric. So now we're all set to put our rows together. If you've ever worked with long strips like, what is the quilt? I think it's a road race, I think it's called, or if you're doing a fence rail and you're working with long strips, you already know that if you do too many strips in a row, you'll get a warp in your product or in your quilt. The strips will start to warp. So we're going to take that into consideration, even though it might not happen on this length of strips. It's a good habit to know that we should do, I do a maximum of 3 strips in a group and then put them together. If I'm sewing, let's say 6 or 9 or whatever, I'll do 3 strips in sections. So I'm going to sew this strip. Just make sure it's centered. No nesting to do. And then I'll do the second one. I'll set it aside and I'll come back and repeat for the bottom half. And there's no nesting, but you just want to make sure that you're centering. You don't want to be leaning to one side and you're off center and there goes your pattern, your design. So you want to make sure that you're centered even though you have no nesting. Okay, so let's get started. There we go. There's our first 2 rows. And now we're going to bring this one up to the center, to the top, I should say. And so another 1/4 inch seam. You want to be sure, again, once again, I always like to stress that you want to press. Make sure everything is nice and flat so that when you do attach the next row, you're attaching it properly. If your first row is all wrinkled up and your second one is flat, and you're going to have a hard time lining it up and you won't be happy with the result. So make sure everything is well pressed. And there's our top half. Nice and straight, well pressed, looking terrific. I'm going to now tackle the bottom. And when I pressed, I wanted to mention I pressed one to the top and one to the bottom. It doesn't really matter. You can press them both in the same direction if you want to. There's no nesting involved at this point, so it's not going to interfere with anything. But I like spreading it out evenly, so I did one towards the top and one towards the bottom. Okay, so we're going to get these rows sewn together. I better look again so I don't make a mistake. Okay, I didn't want to sew the wrong side. Just line it up in the center and also along here with a 1/4 inch. Here's our first 2 bottom rows, and now we're going to attach this one. Once again, making sure that we're centering it up. And we'll sew the 1/4 inch. And here's our bottom half. Isn't this cute? I love this block. I think it's so fun. So now all we have to do is put the center together, and this is the only time that we're going to worry about nesting our seam. And now you're an old pro because you've already done this so much nesting when you did the March block, and you've pressed your seams towards the outside, towards the inside, so you have them perfectly flat. If you want to keep it in place, add a pin. Check the second one, make sure it's perfectly flat. If it was overlapping and not placed right, you would feel a little lump. So you want to make sure that seam is lining up really nice. See, I pulled it overlapping. Now I'm just going to reseat it, and there, nice and flat. So we'll put another pin in it. Keep this all lined up. We'll sew our 1/4 inch seam in the center, give it one more good flat press, and we'll be done with this block. And here we go. Isn't this gorgeous? I love this block. So once again, I've heard it called Mineral Spring, and I've also heard it called the Grand Block. So I just need to clean up my edges a little bit where they're off and trim up my threads. I don't do those during the video because it would just take too long to record the video. Once again, check below this video. You'll find a link to our sewing group called Stitch It with Cricut if you'd like to participate in our Jelly Roll Block of the Month challenge. I hope you're going to enjoy doing this one. Thank you for watching.